Juliana's Child, illustrated by Lautaro Allende, written by Grant Crowther, narrated by Autumn Holley. Arlo walked out of the general store at a hurried pace, pulling his young son along by his hand. There was an angry look on the man's face, and he scowled at the boy once they were outside. "But Dad, that lady had blue skin," the portly boy of about 10 years cried out in a whining tone. The man did not speak. He lifted the heavy lad up, jumped aboard his carriage, and then set the horse off to a good pace. Once they had pulled away from the store and were on the road home, he finally turned to the boy. "You should never point at people. It's rude," Arlo chided his son. The boy looked down at his feet confused. "I know, she had blue skin. It startled you," the father said, easing up his harsh tone a bit. "But that is a very dangerous woman, and I want you to promise me to keep away from her. Is that understood?" Arlo said sternly. "I will," the boy said, in that same irritating whine. "But why?" he asked curiously. "I guess you are old enough now, and you are going to learn about it soon enough from the other kids at school," Arlo conceded. "Let me tell you the story of where she comes from. It's a story every parent in Finchester tells their child when they are around your age. When we have to make sure our children realize the importance of never going near that lady," Arlo said. And as they rode further, Arlo recited this tale to his boy. Once not long ago, there was a woman named Juliana. Juliana Windward, the epitome of beauty and grace, faced a harrowing tragedy that forever altered the course of her life. In the town of Finchester, a darkness unfurled that changed her very being, from once a wonderful, kind, caring mother into an insane and evil menace. In the heart of her home, Juliana's kitchen stood as a testament to her passion. Here, surrounded by the familiar tools of her culinary craft, she had often lost herself in the joy of cooking, each dish a masterpiece of flavor and presentation. Yet, all that changed on one ill-fated day. A momentary lapse, a slip of her usually steady hand, caused a tray collecting dripping fat to tumble. Flames, ravenous and untamed, surged forth, ensnaring Juliana in their destructive and malevolent embrace. Her anguished cries pierced the tranquil evening, resounding through the streets of Finchester. In a frenzied panic, she stumbled forward, a human torch in the clutches of despair. The once enchanting features that had captivated the hearts of many men were changed forever, disfigured, twisted into a fearsome and grotesque form. Arnold Trussell, who owned a barbershop across the street, was cleaning up his establishment when Juliana's burning body came running from the front door. Spotting her from the store's front window, he immediately sprang forth like a guardian angel, armed with nothing more than a barber's cape. With swift determination, he smothered the flames that threatened to claim Juliana's life. Though her life was spared, her scarred flesh bore witness to the infernal ordeal she had endured. Though the flames had been snuffed out and her life had been saved, the physical pain of healing from such a horrible injury was more than the human spirit could endure. The flames had seared not only her body, but also her fragile psyche. Seeking refuge from the prying eyes of a judgmental world, she retreated to the solitude of the attic, a place that would become both her sanctuary and prison. In the dimly lit expanse of the attic, Juliana fashioned a strange, forlorn space for herself. A worn mattress lay on the cold floor, a pitiful respite for her weary body. Nearby, a bathing tub, unadorned and barren, became the theater for her daily ritual of agony. There, she would sit, hunched and trembling, meticulously cleansing and redressing her wounds, each touch a torment that sent shards of pain coursing through her veins. At first, Juliana yearned for her husband's comfort, his touch to soothe the relentless agony that plagued her existence. But as time passed, the pain was too unbearable, his tender words and encouragement only sending her into fits of rage. The physical and emotional chasm between them grew wider with each passing day. Her husband, Ralph, once her source of solace, became a mere vessel for practical duties. Ralph would ascend to the attic, his footstep heavy with reluctance, to bring her fresh bandages, gather her bedsheets, fill and drain the water. He would bring her meals that she rarely ate. His presence to her now was a cruel reminder of the life she had loved. Juliana's physical transformation after her accident was a grotesque testament to the horrors she had endured. Her once radiant skin, now marred by the relentless flames, resembled the scales of a reptilian creature. The scars etched upon her face, once a canvas of striking beauty, now created an otherworldly visage that repulsed and scared those who beheld it. Ralph, who had once been captivated by her charm and grace, now could hardly look upon her. This, paired with her a new short-tempered and cruel personality, made his love wither like a fragile blossom touched by frost. The accident had shattered his perception of the woman he once adored, replacing it with a deep-seated revulsion that gnawed at his morality. Their young, innocent child, still untouched by the cruelties of the world, recoiled in fear at the sight of their mother's transformation. Her new appearance, like something from a nightmarish tale, terrified them. Yet their young minds still sought understanding and comfort from the woman they had once known as their mother. But Juliana, consumed by her own pain and inner demons, could no longer offer comfort to her children. Instead, she became aloof and distant, her words to them laced with bitterness and cruelty. The tender bonds that once connected her to her offspring began to fray, replaced by a growing chasm of fear and mistrust. Juliana's sanity appeared to be fraying as well. Whether this deterioration was her mind's way of grappling with the excruciating pain she experienced, or if it was influenced by a darker, more malevolent force, only Juliana could truly reveal. However, her husband Ralph, reflecting on those haunting days following her accident, firmly believed that more than mere psychological strain was at play. During Ralph's brief visits to her attic refuge, she would recount peculiar tales. Initially, her words seemed mere ramblings, but Ralph soon discerned a recurring motive of the supernatural and the macabre within them. She often spoke of a green mist emanating from the floorboards, seemingly attempting to infiltrate her through her breath. Although she claimed to have resisted its advances so far, she confided in her waning determination to do so. She warned him that she would inevitably give in to it and was unsure of the consequences. Disturbingly, she also professed to be able to read Ralph's thoughts, accusing him of harboring dark sentiments towards her and attributing to him the most vile and disturbing intentions. She even extended these unsettling assertions towards her own children. On another day, not long after her troubling confessions about the green mist, during a routine visit to bring her new bandages, Ralph noticed another change in Juliana. The perpetual anguish that previously clouded her eyes seemed to have lightened slightly, replaced by an unsettling, manic smile. Hesitantly, he ventured, "Juliana, there's something different about you today. It's been a long time since I've seen you smile, and while it's a welcome relief, it seems somewhat disturbed." His voice trailed off, tentative, wary of her now frequent and unpredictable outbursts. Juliana, much to his surprise, responded without any hint of anger. With an almost exuberant tone, she shared, "Oh, Ralph, you wouldn't believe what happened last night. I let the green mist in. I stopped evading it, and instead, I took a breath. And something changed in me. Though the pain persists, and every nerve ending in my damaged skin still screams at the slightest touch, it's as if clarity has returned to me. I've grasped how to navigate this torment." Attempting to match her newfound enthusiasm, Ralph responded, "That sounds wonderful, Juliana. Yet he couldn't shake off a sense of foreboding. Her smile, far from being reassuring, seemed to be teetering on the edge of madness. With a mixture of hope and trepidation, he asked, "Does this mean you'll be rejoining us outside the attic soon?" Her countenance shifted abruptly as she responded curtly, "No, but now I see a path forward. A future for me." The manic brightness in her eyes faded, replaced by an emotionless void. She gazed at Ralph intently, then whispered, "Something greater than this pitiful existence with you is on the horizon." Ralph, momentarily taken aback, considered pressing her for details. However, he thought better of it, fearing another barrage of delirium, or worse, a furious argument. He also took note of the distinct phrasing she had used. Specifically, she had stated, "I now see a path forward, a future for me, not for us." With a heavy heart, he withdrew from the room, the weight of despair pressing on him. He was left with the chilling realization that the Juliana he once knew was irretrievably lost to him. Ralph, burdened by the weight of his shattered dreams and the venom that now so commonly dripped from Juliana's lips, grew to despise the woman he had married. He believed the accident had not only disfigured her physically, but had also destroyed the kind and gentle soul he had once cherished. The once vibrant woman had become a hollow shell, haunted by her own pain, and something incomprehensibly sinister seemed to lurk within her soul. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Ralph's resentment festered like an open wound. The once happy household had become a battleground, with love replaced by bitter resentment and accusations. Almost continual arguments and spitefully cruel words deepened the chasm between husband and wife, pushing them further into the realm of their own private hells. One evening, as darkness cloaked the town of Finchester, Ralph Winward was roused from a fitful slumber by a haunting melody weaving through the night air. He rose from bed in hopes to locate its source. As he reached the window, a glimmer of hope sparked within him as the music still danced in his ears like a spectral symphony. But, to his dismay, as his eyes scanned the moonlit streets, the melody abruptly ceased, leaving only a silence that hung heavy in the night air. Ralph peered into the shadows, straining to catch a glimpse of the unseen musician who had enraptured him. But the darkened alleyway remained empty, devoid of any presence that might explain the enchanting melody that had stirred his soul. On subsequent nights, Ralph found himself haunted by the same mysterious music, which was soon accompanied by a series of other puzzling disturbances. Over the course of a few weeks, while the children were nestled deep in dreams, Ralph would lie in restless anticipation, straining his ears for the uncanny melodies that seemed to waft from the outdoors, followed by unsettling noises emanating from the attic. These sounds suggested a clandestine gathering, faint footsteps, barely discernible rustlings, and the hushed exchange of words he couldn't quite decipher. More than once, he'd rush up the stairs, driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, to confront Juliana, but she always kept the door securely bolted, leaving him no choice but to inquire through the timber barrier. Her responses were predictably terse, often tinged with annoyance, as she insisted she'd merely been pacing in the night and talking to herself. On subsequent nights, he tiptoed up the stairs, hoping for a glimpse of shadows under the door, or to hear the mysterious intruder's voice. But, as if alerted to his approach, the subtle disturbances from the attic would cease the moment he drew near. Though his inspections were constantly evaded, and eventually the strange occurrences ended, deep down, a part of him knew, with an unsettling certainty, that something ominous had occurred on those nights. Over time, still confined to the attic, Juliana's behavior grew increasingly peculiar as she spoke more and more about the new life she needed to pursue. Abruptly, one day, After never having ventured outside the attic, she walked down the stairwell dressed in formal attire. She entered the foyer where Ralph happened to be mending a broken chair. He stood startled and asked her, "Where are you going?" Juliana replied, "To the bank. I'm going to look into purchasing my own home." Upon further inquiry, she told Ralph she was going to find out if there were any nearby estates for sale, with the intent of purchasing one for herself. She had resolved to relocate away from town. Ralph, taken aback, felt an unexpected wave of relief rather than sorrow at her intention to depart. With eyes wide in bewilderment, he stepped aside. As confident as if nothing strange had occurred, she exited the home and made her way towards the bank. When she returned later that day, she announced that she had indeed purchased a small homestead in the heart of the wooded countryside, a ways outside of town. She claims to have used a small sum of money from a savings account left to her by her father. This was peculiar, as Ralph had never heard of such an account. She even showed Ralph the deed she carried in her hand, and indeed it held her name as its owner. Within only a few days, Juliana moved out. Ralph took her to the home himself, loading a cargo of clothes and household items into his wagon. He helped her on her exit from their once jovial abode. The ride out to the estate was long, over 3 hours, the road growing increasingly bumpy as they went. Finally, upon arrival at the little side road, Juliana's new home came into view. The house, cloaked in shadows, stood as a haunting presence. It seemed to swallow the feeble rays of sunlight that dared to pierce its decaying facade. It stood an impressive 3 stories tall, with a square turret at the front that rose to a 4th-story tower window. The exterior walls, once sturdy and proud, now sagged under the weight of neglect. A heavy scent of must from inside the home wafted outside, a testament to its years of abandonment. The wooden siding was rotten, and pieces had fallen away. The stairs leading up to the entrance looked like they might collapse, and most of the window panes were missing. Ralph was horrified at the sight, but to Juliana, it might as well have been a palace. It was the first genuine smile he had seen on her face since the accident. She asked for only her things to be brought into the foyer, insisting she would handle the rest herself. Juliana had the key. She approached first, ascending the creaky stairs, and opened the front door to allow Ralph's entry with her belongings. Ralph followed behind with his arms full of luggage. He walked carefully on the steps, the weight of the bags causing the planks to bend beneath him. But, to his relief, they did not break. When he set the bags down on the floor inside the foyer, a chill went down his spine. The interior was just as foreboding as the exterior. Its decaying timbers and cobweb-laden corners bore the weight of years gone by, a testament to forgotten dreams and desolate solitude. A grand foyer opened up to a large stairwell, and 3 arched doorways leading to darkened rooms beyond. The floorboards creaked with each tentative step, their once lustrous surface now worn and faded. However, as Ralph tried to look further into the house, Juliana stopped him in his tracks. "Thank you, Ralph. I appreciate your help. But that is all I need. Please leave now. I have too much to do before evening," Juliana said firmly. The look in her eyes told Ralph not to press her any further. So he exited the place, glancing back a few times, only to see Juliana already at work moving the luggage further into the dark interior of the home. Ralph took one long look around the property before ascending back up to his wagon. Surrounding the home, the forest loomed, its ancient trees reaching upward, blocking out the sun and casting a perpetual twilight upon the land. It was a foreboding place. The Juliana he had married would have been frightened to set foot in these lands even for a moment, let alone to stay here on her own for the night. Within the dense undergrowth, dangers lurked, unseen and unnamed. Beasts with feral eyes prowled in the shadows, while the whispers of unseen entities carried on the breeze. Despite Ralph's fearful observations, the house was transformed in Julia's eyes. They were illuminated by a flickering flame of madness, or perhaps a diluted enchantment. To her distorted perception, the decaying walls became a canvas for her twisted imagination, the cobwebs like delicate threads of ethereal beauty. The desolation and decay that repulsed others held a mysterious allure for her, an invitation into a world that defied conventional understanding. As Juliana bid her final farewell, waving at Ralph from the doorway, a haunting smile tugged at her lips, revealing a happiness that had long been absent from her countenance. The weight of her past life fell away, replaced by the anticipation of solitude and a newfound kinship with the unseen forces that whispered through her mind. And so, in a bittersweet moment, Ralph waved back with a faint smile of his own before heading home. He turned to look back a few more times, hoping she might come rushing out of the doorway. But deep down, he knew that was only his final hope for her returned sanity. Instead, she closed the door and disappeared into the house, into the embrace of her newfound sanctuary. It was a departure marked by both sorrow and a sensation of liberation. Ralph knew deep down that their paths had diverged irrevocably, each destined to follow separate roads into the unknown. As Juliana settled into her reclusive lifestyle, new interests and studies filled her days. A mind, once distracted by domestic duties and menial tasks, bloomed like the twisted flowers of a forgotten garden, expanding into more worldly and academic matters. She was entranced by sciences and histories from distant corners of the globe. An increasingly peculiar flow of deliveries was brought to her desolate abode, as she filled the empty rooms with macabre antiques and foreign furnishings. Books brimming with ancient knowledge and esoteric secrets arrived in a ceaseless stream, feeding her insatiable thirst. Ralph, burdened by concern and a lingering sense of responsibility for his estranged wife, found himself drawn back to the house time and again to check on her well-being. With each visit, he hoped to glean some semblance of understanding, to grasp the nature of Juliana's new personality, but his efforts only deepened his despair and discomfort as she evaded his attempts to unravel the enigma she had become. Her only responses were filled with cruelty and aloofness. Even mentioning her children seemed to have no effect on her. On one such visit, Ralph arrived at the home to find a stack of books on Juliana's doorstep. He couldn't resist perusing the strange and morbid titles such as Demonology of the Caucasus, Rites of the Mongolian Deathworm, Occult Taxidermy, and other dreadful topics. He carefully picked up the leather-bound volumes and cradled them in his arms before knocking. After 3 tries, to which there was no reply, he decided to try the door and found it was unlocked. Calling out her name, Ralph crossed the threshold into the foyer. His eyes surveyed the ever-transforming interior. A gallery of curiosities met his eyes, and startlingly, standing in the dim entrance to the parlor was Juliana's face, shrouded in shadows, a mask of secrets and distant contemplation. She stared back at him, acknowledging his presence with only a slight smirk. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Ralph mustered the courage to confront her. His voice, tinged with a mix of concern and trepidation, probed the depths of her enigmatic world for answers. "Juliana," he began, his tone cautious yet determined. "I cannot fathom the nature of these books you surround yourself with. The knowledge they contain, it feels malevolent, dark. What draws you to such sinister topics of research?" A flicker of fury ignited in Juliana's eyes, transforming her distant smirk into a blaze of intensity. The air grew heavy with tension, as if a storm were brewing within the walls of the house itself. Her voice, now carrying an otherworldly timbre, cut through the silence with the precision of a spectral dagger. "Answering such an inquiry would be a waste of my time," she hissed through the clenched teeth, her words dripping with venomous spite. "Poor Ralph, your pretty little maid is gone. Life must be so treacherous without someone to take care of you," she whined with mocking concern. "Maybe you could get one of the town whores to come clean your mess. I deal with more important things these days. She spoke in such a hateful tone that Ralph shuddered. Angered by her words, he retorted, "Should the town whores also raise your children?" allowing his own venom to show through. "If they're such a burden, just drown them in the tub on their next washing day," she replied amusedly. Her indifference was so pronounced that she almost sounded horrifically hopeful. "Surely you are strong enough to hold them under the water for a few minutes," she continued. The fact that she could linger on such a description made Ralph's stomach drop. He stared back at her with utter disgust. "I don't know who is in control of this body I speak with, but it is not Juliana," Ralph replied, attempting to reflect her callous tone, but his voice wavered just slightly. They locked eyes there for a moment. In that eerie, dimly lit foyer, Ralph found himself inexplicably entranced by the transformation she had undergone. Summoning his courage, he asked, "What dark forces have you welcomed into your life, Juliana? If our marriage vows had any authority, I command you. What name do you invoke in your pursuit of this dark knowledge?" A haunting silence filled the air as Juliana's lips curled into a wicked smile. With a voice that seemed to resonate from deep within the bowels of the earth, she uttered an alien name, laden with ancient power and dread. "Throgtook," she whispered, her lips quivering reluctantly, as if uttering the words caused her physical pain. In that moment, a flicker of green light ignited within Juliana's eyes, an eerie luminance that shimmered with an alien glow. Her irises, once a mirror of her pain, now seemed to reflect something far more sinister. A malevolent presence, like some sort of parasite, had taken root within her soul, and in that moment, it had shown itself to him. Ralph's breath caught in his throat, and a chill raced down his spine. He felt inexplicable connection to that name, a name that resonated with ancient terrors and cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension. His mind recoiled, struggling to process the implications of Juliana's invocation. A primal intuition was warning him of the horrors tied to that name and to this damned house. That eerie green flare in Juliana's eyes would be seared into his memory forever, as was the whisper of that accursed name, Throgtook. He instinctively understood the gravity of uttering it aloud and sharing its significance with others. It was more than just a symbol of Juliana's madness. It was a manifestation of a genuine supernatural force, one that had taken his wife forever. This realization would plague Ralph, shadowing him with guilt and filling his nightmares. Had he done something that had allowed this? Could he have prevented it? A braver soul would have acted, ending her suffering right then and there. God knows it would have been for the better, not just for her, but also the inevitable victims such an evil would ensnare. Consumed by terror and a deep-rooted instinct for survival, Ralph felt an irresistible pull to escape. As he turned to flee the foyer, sinister laughter resonated through the house, its haunting timbre interwoven with the dark echo of the ancient god's name that had so corrupted Juliana's soul. In his haste, Ralph tripped, descending the porch stairs, and as he scrambled to rise, he felt the eerie touch of diminutive hands clutching at his neck. Shaking off the chilling sensation, he made a frantic dash to his wagon, spurring his horse towards Finchester with desperate urgency. Juliana, with her unsettling behavior, had already alienated herself from the few remaining friends and family she had, leaving her with all but one peer, Egbert Throngbolt, the peculiar owner of Finchester's bookstore. From here on, it is mainly through this peculiar man's recountings and a few other delivery drivers that we gain most of the information of what happened next. What was most strange was that Ralph had never known of Egbert before this time. To Ralph's knowledge, the two had never been friends prior to her move to that remote house. But perhaps her numerous purchases from his establishment had created some sort of bond between the two. As for Ralph, he found it too repellent to continue with his own visits to Juliana's cursed property. Following that last harrowing experience, he relinquished his role as her caretaker. He withdrew, ceasing to be her bridge to the outside world. In his absence, only Egbert and the few delivery men who frequented her residence with unyielding consistency became the chroniclers of her life within those dense woods. Their tales of eerie encounters found eager audiences at local taverns, and soon, whispered accounts permeated every corner of the town. The reports from these men painted a disturbing picture. Juliana's purchases had grown increasingly bizarre, extending far beyond books and odd antiques. Whole loads of raw building materials were being brought to her home in those desolate woods, as if she had planned to embark upon a grand renovation project of some sort. The costs escalated far beyond what Ralph's meager allowance was offering, and Ralph grew anxious, his concern mounting with each passing day. And then, the unimaginable. Something far worse. Reports came in that Juliana's belly was swelling, that she was pregnant. Aside from her death, this news was likely the only thing that would have brought Ralph back to that house. But unlike the report of her death, which would have come with a sigh of relief, a report that she may be bringing new life to this world filled Ralph with such anxiety and dread that it made his head spin. Unable to resist the gnawing curiosity that plagued him, Ralph resolved to make one final visit to the house. He knew he had to confront Juliana to see if this most horrendous rumor was true. Upon his return to the house, a sense of foreboding weighed heavily upon him. The once dilapidated structure now stood as a bizarre amalgamation of old and new, an architectural chaos in the midst of construction that defied reason stood before him. He wondered if it was Juliana herself assembling these structural components, perhaps using her new cursed abilities to fuel such an endeavor. The air hummed with an otherworldly energy. A potent mixture of fascination and unease filled Ralph as he approached. When he arrived, the door was open, as if awaiting him. He knocked lightly on a porch beam and called Juliana's name, but there was no reply. Somewhat reluctantly, Ralph entered through the open door. There, standing in the dimly lit foyer, was Juliana. Ralph's gaze fell upon her once beautiful countenance, now twisted by the scars of her accident. The shadows in the room only illuminated them, making her appear even more grotesque. But it was her swollen belly that caught his attention. Her hands lay rested upon the enormous bulge, and she gleamed at him with a wicked, prideful grin. A wave of repulsion washed over him as he realized the impossibility of being the father of this child. It had been nearly half a year since she had moved out to those woods, and their last intimate encounter had occurred long before her accident, many months prior to that. The revelation struck him like a hammer's blow, shattering any remnants of his former affections. Juliana's repulsive appearance and her impending motherhood marked the final blow to any remnant of attachment he had left for her. Disgust mingled with a deep-seated sorrow as Juliana delivered one last nail of insult into the coffin that was their marriage. He said nothing to her, nor did she speak to him. Silently, Ralph turned away, his footsteps heavy with resignation and a sense of bitter finality. The truth had been laid bare before him, a truth that spoke of a connection severed and a bond forever broken. He left the desolate household behind, carrying with him the weight of the past and the lingering echoes of a life that had crumbled to ashes. As he walked back to his wagon, he heard soft laughter, cruel mocking snickers that sounded like they came from a crowd of onlookers, though there were no other people there. He took one last look towards the open door before he left. There he saw the small frame of Juliana standing, and he called out to her, "Juliana, I hope that whatever became of you, you are at peace. I know this is not you I have visited today." And with that, he urged his horse to quickly depart. As Ralph journeyed through the dense woods en route to Finchester, he found himself deep in thought over the unfolding situation. To the residents of the town, the enigma surrounding Juliana's pregnancy, steeped in secrecy and scandal, would undoubtedly become fodder for eager tongues and wagging whispers. The realization that many might revel in the cruel jest of his adulterous wife stung, but only just. Dominating his psyche were feelings of profound concern for the yet-to-be-born child and for the very fate of the citizens of Finchester. Egbert Throngbolt, the enigmatic owner of Finchester's bookstore, stood tall and lean, with a notably effeminate demeanor that often became the subject of town gossip. His unused status and distinct quirks marked him as an outsider. Yet, with Juliana, he had forged an unexpected alliance. The relationship might have been cemented by Juliana's frequent and valuable purchases, many of which were rare and obscure books. However, others believe it was Egbert's own captivation with her and her peculiar interests that drew them together. Regardless of the reason, Egbert made it a point to personally deliver her orders, further strengthening their unique bond. Reports from Egbert claimed that Juliana was embracing her newfound solitude with vigor. She had become a Renaissance woman of sorts. Self-taught, she had taken on the role of contractor for a seemingly ridiculous renovation. The desolate house was undergoing a startling metamorphosis, from dilapidated farmhouse to some kind of oriental mansion, alien in form. She employed a number of immigrant workers, whom oddly enough all came from the Far East. Peculiar indeed, since there were very few people of such heritage in the surrounding area. No one knew where she had found such laborers. They must have resided on the property itself, for no one ever saw them in town. Even more fascinating was the news that came about Juliana's child. Rumors spread like wildfire. Apparently, Juliana had given birth within the walls of that remote mansion. It was, of course, Egbert who had brought back the tale. With a tremor in his voice, he recounted the day he had met the child for the first time. He said he was delivering a particularly rare and delicate manuscript that had been shipped all the way from India. He was greeted by one of the laborers, a large dark-skinned man who did not speak English, but knew Egbert from previous visits. When he saw the manuscript, his eyes brightened with eager attention, and he led Egbert to the study, where Juliana often resided in the day. Upon entering the study, he was shocked at what lay before him. In the corner of the room, lying in an ornately decorated wooden crib, was a baby. And around this baby stood a number of Juliana's workforce. 2 even bowed down as if in reverence, and a third was reading passages softly to it in a foreign tongue. But what was the most amazing part of the spectacle was the child itself. The baby boy sat up in an unconventionally mature position. It stared at Egbert in a surprisingly alert manner, and its skin gleamed a surreal shade of royal blue. As Egbert gaped at the boy, eyes wide in astonishment, Juliana neither mentioned nor referred to the child. Instead, she concentrated on the document Egbert held. With great anticipation, she snatched it from his hands, having her hired hand lead him back outside immediately. The news spread like whispers on a lonely wind, stoking the fires of speculation and fear. The townsfolk, already unsettled by Juliana's transformation and the swirling rumors about her, now found themselves facing an enigma that surpassed their darkest imaginings. The surreal shade of blue that colored the child's skin became a symbol of the unnatural forces at play, further fueling stories of demonic origins and otherworldly influences. Fear gripped the hearts of those who dared to contemplate the fate of Juliana's offspring, their minds filled with visions of foreign gods and supernatural beings. Amidst the growing unease, the grand and unusual mansion was erected and stood as a haunting reminder of Juliana's descent into madness. Its peculiar Asian architecture, a mysterious allure, became a fearful landmark in the countryside, casting a foreboding presence that sent waves of strange and malevolent energy towards anyone who dared to travel past. The child was named Nolan, as Egbert learned in future visits. Juliana would speak of her new infant with utmost pride. However, she never uttered any references to her former children. Amid rumors of her alleged adultery, Ralph obtained a legal divorce and severed all financial ties with Juliana and her remote abode. Nevertheless, deliveries to the mansion continued unabated, and the frequency and magnitude of the deliveries steadily increased. No one knew how she had obtained the funds. No expense was spared in the pursuit of knowledge and enrichment for young Nolan. An unending array of luxuries poured into the mansion, fueling his insatiable thirst for exotic decadences. A barn was built to house horses, cows, and all sorts of other animals from lands far and wide. Even further renovations were undertaken to create a magnificent library, a sprawling sanctuary of knowledge within the twisted walls of the mansion. Animals of all kinds and species were delivered over the years, filling the once desolate grounds with the sounds of strange, exotic creatures. Their purpose remained shrouded in mystery, their existence adding to the enigmatic aura that surrounded the estate. As the mansion expanded in opulence, so too did the eclectic retinue of servants from far-off shores, each steeped in their own enigmatic origins and idiosyncrasies. They were, to the best of the town's knowledge, bereft of English. Yet, Egbert attested that Nolan was versed in various Eastern tongues and would converse with them in their indigenous languages. These foreign denizens add an exotic aura to the estate, their cultures and dialects unfamiliar and arcane to the simple folk of Finchester. Within the imposing and eerie walls of the mansion they dwelled, their dealings with the outer world minimal and cryptic, enveloped in an air of silent intent. Rumors of these exotic servants, distinguished by their foreign features and the peculiar circumstances of their cohabiting on Juliana's estate alongside her child, spread like wildfire, fueling the most intense speculations Finchester had ever witnessed. The town, already simmering with suspicion and unease, regarded the mansion's residents with a mix of fascination, mistrust, and subdued fear. Wild speculations emerged about the mansion's undertakings. Some believed Juliana was leading an Eastern cult, while others conjectured that the illustrious abode had evolved into a sanctuary for pilgrims of a distant religion. While a multitude of these surmises stemmed from unfounded, xenophobic apprehensions, a consensus emerged that there existed, at the very least, a disconcerting anomaly within the mansion's confines. Egbert and the deliverymen, serving as the main conduits of information, whispered tales that seemed to grow more and more absurd. Some swore to have seen rituals being performed on the property, and still others claimed to have heard horrible, agonizing cries from within the ever-growing number of storage sheds and barns that were being built there. These rumors continued to sow the seeds of intrigue and speculation. As Nolan matured into a young man, the stories painted a portrait of someone even more peculiar than his mother. He was of a diminutive stature, standing only just above 5 feet in height, but Nolan possessed a surprising handsomeness that mirrored the once beautiful features of his mother's face. It was Egbert who had the most direct contact with the bizarre little man. The strange blue hue that colored his skin, coupled with his short stature, were only the beginning of what set him apart from the ordinary. His personality was even more strange. It was as if he was not of this world. He spoke with a strange accent, possibly from having been raised by so many foreign servants. He was stoic to a level that was malevolent, always glaring with eyes that seemed to bore into one's soul. In spite of his small stature, his body was incredibly robust and perfectly healthy, his limbs strong and capable. He moved with an agility that defied his height. Egbert had witnessed the man engaging in numerous sports, archery, hunting, and various athletic pursuits across the expansive lands surrounding the mansion. There was no doubt that the young man had an incredible thirst for knowledge, with a heavy focus on the sciences. As Nolan matured, he demanded more and more from his mother. His needs seemed to have no bounds, and somehow, Juliana always found the funds to appease him. She acquired the neighboring properties, mostly empty parcels of forest and some hills. She would offer absurd amounts to the more stubborn landowners in order to expand her holdings. Over time, Egbert himself became more distant, recounting less to those he still spoke with. Some said the contact with Juliana and her boy might have plagued him with whatever madness was occurring out there. His eyes grew hollow, and he became a frail shell of himself. No doubt, he was earning a small fortune playing the middleman for all the items he delivered, but the increased wealth only seemed to plague him with demons. Perhaps he knew more about what was going out there than he admitted. The last few reports that came from Egbert were troubling. He said that Nolan was becoming more and more prone to mad fits of rage, where he would not only yell, but physically assault the people around him. Most of the time, the abuse was aimed at the servants who constantly surrounded him. According to Egbert, horrible acts of violence were commonly committed to these poor foreign men and women, but increasingly they were directed at his own mother. In spite of this, the residents of Juliana's mansion never swayed in their reverence for him. Even Juliana herself seemed to kowtow in fear and subservience to the little blue man. On top of this, the deliveries began to take on a more mechanical and practical nature. Books now only made up a fraction of the deliveries. The bulk of the purchases were more like what one might find in hospitals or sanitariums: skeletal models of anatomy, surgical equipment, dental equipment, an assortment of chemicals, alongside other unidentifiable instruments. It was around this time that Egbert disappeared. He had been growing increasingly distant, and one day, seemingly out of the blue, he sold his establishment and his house and left town. What was even more disturbing was that more than one account claimed that after cashing in on his estate, Egbert was seen taking his carriage towards Juliana's estate. He was never seen again. From this point forward, first-hand accounts regarding the activity on Juliana's property dwindled to a mere trickle. The most reliable source of such tales was one Emily Junker, a close confidant of Naomi, one of Juliana's tragically abandoned children. As the restless sands of time passed, nearly 2 somber decades elapsed since Juliana's devastating accident. During this span, the children Juliana had borne to Ralph grew into their own, without the maternal presence they were born to. A nascent curiosity, however, took root in their hearts. This was especially pronounced in Naomi, the youngest and most sensitive of the Windward brood. Merely an infant when the catastrophic incident occurred, her perception of her mother was not drawn from memories, but rather from terrifying tales. These stories painted a figure so intimidating, Naomi grappled with recognizing Juliana as her mother. Her father, Ralph, maintained a stony silence on the topic, offering only a stern warning to his children. They were never to seek her out. But blood runs thick and is sometimes unavoidably linked. As reported by Emily, her dear friend grew increasingly melancholic, curious about her long-estranged mother. Now mature enough to venture out on her own, it was noon on a crisp autumn day when Naomi asked her dear friend Emily if she would accompany her to the hinterlands of Finchester, to Juliana's infamous property, to finally quench her fascination. A good and loyal friend, Emily agreed, only because she had witnessed the yearning of her dear friend firsthand and the pain it seemed to be causing her. Emily had hoped this visit might put that to rest. Bravely, the two headed through the forest hills towards the legendary estate. As the pair stepped onto the property later that day, their eyes widened in awe and confusion. The sight that unfolded before them was a spectacle of mechanical contraptions, cranes, and heavy building machines. A barn housing horses and other creatures stood nearby, while warehouses loomed in the distance, their contents shrouded in mystery. But it was the house itself that was the most astonishing. Of course, they had both heard the tales of it, but they never could have pictured the odd form of that structure without seeing it for themselves. It stood 4 stories in height, though it could even have been 5. It was hard to tell. The floors themselves didn't appear uniformly level. Tentatively, they approached the door, stepping onto the wide wooden porch, the beams and railings in a style unlike anything they had ever seen. Everything about the place seemed alien in nature. It was Naomi who dared to knock 3 times on the door. There was silence for a moment. The two stood in anxious anticipation. Finally, the door opened, and to both of their astonishment, standing before them was the incredible figure of Nolan. He smiled at the two of them politely, looking almost abashed as he averted his eyes downwards to the floor. In spite of this, Emily described the man's structure as strangely prodigious. It was as though the man, who must have stood at most 5 feet 2, loomed above both of them. His skin was a surreal royal blue, just as the stories had said it would be. He wore no shirt, only a tan leather vest with red and black bead patterns and linen pants cut above the ankle. He was muscular and oddly handsome. Though sheepish, his authority was unquestionable. They heard a call from one of the adjoining rooms, the voice of a woman, somewhat hollow and gravely. "Nolan, please have our guests see me in the parlor." Emily took Naomi's hand in hers. She could sense her friend's anxiety was even greater than her own. Nolan stepped away, leaving them to enter the parlor on their own. Once inside the lavishly decorated room, Emily witnessed the peculiar reunion between mother and daughter. Juliana's appearance was horrific, but the scars on her body were only a portion of what made her so terrifying. It was her demeanor that was more disturbing. She seemed almost predatory. Her eyes, like an animal's, watched her daughter with a strange hunger. Emily recounted that very little attention was paid to her, from either Nolan or Juliana. It was understandable, she thought, since Naomi was their relation, but there was something very disturbing about it. It did not seem the right kind of attention to be given to one's daughter or half-sister. It was like they wanted to devour her. Juliana did not hug her daughter, only smiled broadly and gestured for the two of them to sit across from her at a little table. The sitting room blazed with heat. It was not a particularly cold day, but a huge fire was burning. Servants brought tea made from herbs that Emily had never smelled before. They sipped it tentatively, seated in uncomfortable chairs with elaborate carvings. The room was decorated with oriental furnishings, every detail of foreign design. None of the items in the room could have come from the shops in Finchester. "Thank you for seeing us," Naomi said nervously, filling the silence. Neither Nolan nor Juliana seemed to be good at socializing. "My brothers send their hellos," she continued, struggling to find the right words. It was terrifying the way her mother stared back at her, and Emily was tempted to grab Naomi's hand at that moment and run. Yet there was not even a single acknowledgement of her words. A few awkward moments later, as Naomi was about to speak again, Juliana put a finger to her lips in a universal gesture for silence. Naomi obliged. Finally, Juliana spoke. She asked no questions, made no comments about her daughter. Instead, she began to tell them the story of the accident, delving into the tale without introduction, as if it was precisely what they had come to hear. "I was a very good cook," was how she began. "And that day was like any other. I was busying myself with my household duties. What an exemplary wife I was," she sneered with disdain. But everything changed that day. I spilled the dripping tray all over my apron, and somehow it lit on fire, probably when I leaned over the stove to grab the cloth I used for cleaning. "I lit up like a Christmas candle," she cackled at her own horror story. A horrible guttural laugh that Emily swore sounded like 2 or even 3 voices laughing at once. The pain was excruciating, like nothing I had ever felt before. Every nerve ending fired at full blast, and only more so after the flames were extinguished. Ralph, he was useless, and I was equally as useless at helping myself. There was no solution. His attempts at tender touches and kind words just made me fill up with rage, and I despised him. He tried his best to help, I guess, but his repulsion was clear as day to me. I don't blame him, really. There was no one and nothing to ease my suffering. I locked myself in the attic as a means to find solace, but there was no escape from that pain. If anyone ever tells you that you get used to pain, they are lying. No, it goes on and on and on. Your nerve endings will keep firing relentlessly, forever, as long as they are damaged. It's enough to drive one mad. I probably would have jumped out of that attic window had it not been for the blue minstrels. I would sit at the attic window and stare down, urging myself to jump. But come nightfall, after the entire household was enshrouded in the veil of sleep, they would emerge. At first, I thought I must have been dreaming, or was in some kind of pain-induced delusion. Down the desolate alleyway, behind her home, a troupe of minstrels would emerge, their presence both enchanting and unnerving. They were not like ordinary minstrels, but rather otherworldly beings, blue-skinned, short in stature but broad in body, dressed in clothes from the Far East, like warriors from the Mongol hordes arriving from the great steppes, now here in my alleyway. Their attire swirled with vibrant colors that contrasted against the shadows of the night. The musicians wielded their instruments with skill, weaving a tapestry of haunting melodies that carried on the breeze, enchanting me and soothing me. Their music was like a siren's call. It beckoned me from the depths of my anguish, offering me the respite I had yearned for. I knew right away what they wanted. They wanted me to let them in. And how could I resist? They alone could proffer me the sanctuary and hope and peace that I so desperately sought. Among the trio of minstrels, there was one who stood out, the smallest of them all. His piercing gaze, framed by pure black eyes, held an otherworldly allure that both frightened and fascinated me. It was as if his gaze possessed an ancient knowledge, a secret language that spoke directly to my tormented soul. In a surge of reckless abandon, I extended my hand from the open window, beckoning the blue-skinned figure into my sanctuary. The ensemble of musicians halted their tunes. With an elegance tinged with mischief, the men stacked upon one another like seasoned acrobats, hands gripping legs, forming a human ladder until the tiniest among them stood precariously on the second man's shoulders. He reached for my outstretched hands. I hoisted him up, and he crept inside, bridging the gap between the surreal and my all-too-real realm of pain and suffering. As he stepped over the threshold, his gaze locked onto mine, and a strange understanding passed between us. From the moment that we embraced, the pain that had plagued me for so long not only dissipated, but was replaced by a sense of joy and pleasure that I had never experienced. It was a rare and intoxicating moment of quenched desires, as though the boundaries of reality had blurred, and a world beyond the mundane had intertwined with my own that offered more than relief. It offered ecstasy. It was the first night in so long that I had actually slept. That alone was a priceless reward. But when I awoke the next morning, beside my bed, there was an enormous bag filled with gold coins. And this happened again and again for the next week. Each night, another bag of coins was left. After that week, they never returned again. And I realized why afterward. I had been ovulating. That was what the blue men had wanted. They wanted to impregnate me. And that was all she said to them. Juliana stood and left the room, leaving the two girls sitting there dumbfounded. It was the most unusual conclusion to such an anticipated event. Relieved that the meeting was over, Emily stood to leave. But Naomi sat there, not ready to go yet, as if in some sort of trance. Emily said she had to physically pull her out of her seat, as she finally managed to get the girl moving towards the door. Nolan reappeared, blocking their path. He said only one sentence. "I hope you visit again, Naomi." And then he moved from the doorway, allowing Emily, who was about ready to scream in terror, to pull her friend with her out the door and down the steps back to their wagon, where they quickly headed away from the dreadful estate. Emily recalled her friend's strange silence on that long journey home, but had chalked it up to the intensity of the visit. After Naomi returned from her first visit to her mother's home, she was never again the same. She appeared distant and detached from her brothers, creating an invisible barrier that left them saddened and worried for their normally warm-hearted sister. They eagerly confronted her, hoping to hear the tale that Naomi had brought back from their long disavowed mother, but she told them nothing. From that day forward, Naomi made clandestine visits to the mansion, often occurring under the cover of darkness. She ventured to that cursed realm time and time again, her actions cloaked in secrecy and mystery. The truth of what transpired within those hollowed walls remains unknown. She refused to yield to the curious gazes and probing questions from her brothers, who had discovered her missing in the night. Whispers of Naomi's nocturnal journeys traveled through the town, igniting curiosity and speculation. Some wondered if she had succumbed to the same peculiar illness that had claimed her mother's sanity, while others contemplated the possibility of a darker influence drawing her back to that grand and sinister mansion. The truth remained hidden, buried deep within the depths of Naomi's soul, as the mansion stood as a silent sentinel, its dark presence casting a long and haunting shadow over the lives of those entangled in its mysterious embrace. After enduring a heated interrogation by her father, Naomi made a life-altering decision. Without any word of explanation or argument, only a silent resolve, she packed a single bag and left that night to the mansion, and she never returned. Whispers laden with vile insinuations spread through the town, igniting rumors of an incestuous relationship between Naomi and her half-brother, sending a chill of repulsion down the spine of anyone who dared to entertain such thoughts. Rumors of incest in relation to that cursed property came as little surprise to the townsfolk. Over the years, so many tales had been told of what went on there that no one knew what was true. No real evidence of anything sinister had come forth as yet. It was all whispers with no substance. But it was the tales of this relationship that became the final straw, breaking the back of the town's tolerance. The whispers grew louder, and anger was growing that would soon need some kind of resolution. The townsfolk, torn between their morbid curiosity and their innate repulsion, grappled with conflicting emotions. Many had known and loved Naomi, as well as her father and brothers. They watched from a distance, their gazes filled with a mixture of judgment, fear, and concern, an inability to fully comprehend why such a kind girl as Naomi would abandon her family for her insane mother and bastard blue-skinned brother cemented the belief that evil forces were at work in that sinister abode. In the end, it was not the relationship between Naomi and Nolan that caused an investigation of the property, but something even more horrible. One fateful, sweltering summer evening, a grotesque event occurred. The door of the local pub swung open with a jolt, and a foreign man entered. His face was grotesquely contorted by what looked like numerous skin grafts and rudimentary operations of a horrendous nature. As he limped feebly forwards into the establishment, the patrons looked on in horror, dripping blood as he went. At first, it appeared the man was dressed in some kind of cowhide, but as the visage cleared itself, it became evident the man was naked. What looked to be hides were actually patches of bovine skin entwined with the poor man's own flesh. Onlookers gasped and screamed as he approached. Unable to speak English, the poor soul garbled in a foreign tongue. Blood streamed from his eyes, staining his face with crimson trails. While half-performed surgeries adorned his body, a grotesque mosaic of stitches crisscrossed his skin. His ears seemed to be those of a pig's. The patches of undulate skin were somehow integrated into his own. Seemingly, he had been in this condition for some time. But perhaps the most chilling sight of all this was his left arm, which had a hoof attached to its end. A shudder of revulsion passed through the crowd as they witnessed the unnatural fusion of flesh and animal appendage. To their disbelief, the arm exhibited faint signs of life, a twisted semblance of movement that defied reason. The man, unable to communicate, babbled incomprehensibly, his desperate gaze always returning to the forest he had fled from, as though terrified of what might have followed him. It was a chilling revelation, a most bizarre and repulsive piece of evidence to the horrors that awaited within the depths of those woods. The townsfolk, their fears now validated, knew all too well the significance of the man's panicked gestures. The patrons of the pub, in a desperate flurry of activity, did their best to aid the poor soul who was clearly in agony. Yet, despite their most valiant efforts, by the time they managed to rush him to the hospital, life had left him. The attending physicians were met with a sight so confounding, it left them utterly horrified. The man's condition stood in stark defiance to all established medical knowledge. Several among the shaken staff couldn't help but whisper among themselves, suggesting that the man's state bordered on the unnatural, perhaps even entering the realm of the paranormal. The tragic demise of the servant sent shockwaves through the town, igniting a sense of urgency within the authorities. A swift investigation was launched into Juliana's estate. A team of officers and inspectors with legal consent were sent to the house, armed and ready if any violence broke out. Upon the authorities' arrival and thorough examination of the mansion, they discovered no solid proof to back the townspeople's horrendous allegations. Juliana, despite her evident madness, demonstrated an uncanny cleverness that evaded their scrutiny. She and her son Nolan portrayed the perfect picture of cooperation, permitting the investigators unobstructed access throughout the property. Much to the investigators' frustration, they uncovered no signs of violence or any form of malevolence. The mansion remained a steadfast bastion of mystery, fiercely shielding its sinister secrets. Lacking concrete evidence, and with the sole witness now silenced forever, the authorities found themselves at an impasse. Frustration simmered within the hearts of the townsfolk, their fear and outrage mounting with each passing day. It seemed that the darkness that had enshrouded the mansion was immune to the reach of justice, a malevolent force that taunted them from behind a veil of obscurity. Desperation settled upon the town as they grappled with the realization that their efforts to expose Juliana and Nolan's atrocities had been thwarted. The authorities, bound by the constraints of the law, could do little to appease the collective desire for justice. The nightmare continued to unfold, unabated and unchallenged, as the fearsome duo remained untouched by the consequences of their heinous actions. Things might have fallen back into their original pattern of whispers and gossip with no action if it was not for Ralph Winward. Juliana's former husband was resolute in finding justice. Not only had he lost a wife, but now also a daughter to this demonic presence. And when news came that Naomi was pregnant, his focus became singular. There would be a resolution found, be it legal or illegal. The news of Naomi's pregnancy sent one more round of shockwaves through the already weary town of Finchester. The once unthinkable notion of an incestuous relationship between siblings now appeared to be an undeniable reality. Ralph, consumed by a mixture of anger, sorrow, and desperation, refused to accept the abomination that was unfolding before him. He raged against the dark forces that had taken hold of his family, demanding that action be taken. He did his best to round up a group of vigilantes to bring an end to the depravity that had infested their lives. United by their shared horror and a collective desire for justice, quite a large number of townsfolk rallied behind Ralph's impassioned plea. With Ralph at the head, the group demanded the authorities take a more aggressive action against Juliana and her son, arguing that following regular protocol and legal procedures should be overturned in this obviously abnormal situation. They demanded the presiding officers to cast aside their hesitations and confront the diabolical presence that had plagued the area for far too long. Ralph's pleas echoed through the corridors of power, reaching the ears of the authorities, who, chastised by their previous failures, felt the weight of the town's mounting unrest and recognized the urgency of the situation. They assembled a task force determined to investigate the obscure matter once again, to uncover the truth and put an end to the fear it brought upon the region. The fate of Naomi's unborn child hung in the balance, a symbol of innocence tainted by the darkness that surrounded its conception. The townsfolk felt that a moral obligation supported their infraction of the legal system. Their hearts were filled with a mix of hope and trepidation as they organized a final confrontation. Their collective breath held in anticipation. They yearned for an end to the nightmare that had haunted their once peaceful town. The sheriff accompanied the mob of angry townsfolk, but only as a force of legitimacy. The true leader of the group was Ralph, but urged to keep their identities hidden. The men wore sacks over their faces. It was an ominous sight and a symbol of the true intent of the crowd. It seemed inevitable that violence was going to break out. Under the cover of night, the mob traveled the road to the mansion. This time, their arrival seemed to be truly unexpected, as the wagons, filled with men, trundled up the pathway to the home. Shadowed figures could be seen emerging from the entrance. Both male and female servants were running to the numerous sheds and warehouses on the estate. The road to the entrance of the house was long, and there was ample time for these men and women to get to those sheds. The wagons increased their speed, sensing the urgency to stop whatever was transpiring. By the time the mob arrived at the porch, most of the men and women had already returned from the storage barns and sheds, retrieving what looked to be other figures, being carried from those storage sheds back to the house. Only 2 stragglers were left. A man and a woman were running to the door of the house when a group of men from the mob jumped from the wagon to intercept them. They screamed in terror as they were dragged to the wagon. The man managed to escape for a moment and immediately pulled a knife from his belt and slit his own throat. The woman, in a similar frenzy, managed to throw herself onto a machete being held by a mob member, ending her own life. Her lifeless body dragged her and the man wielding the massive knife to the ground. Other members of the mob made a run for the door, but by the time they got to it, it was locked. It was clear that time was of the essence. The residents were clearly conspiring to conceal whatever horrendous activities they had been engaged in. Ralph, witnessing the hysterical acts of suicide, feared for the life of his daughter. He yelled out to the crowd to break down the door. After a few futile attempts at ramming the door with their bodies, the mob organized a battering ram made from a quickly felled tree. The combined force of the crew soon crashed through the threshold. Men flooded into the foyer of the mansion, but to their astonishment, as the mob raged through the rooms of the house, they found that all of the rooms lay empty. The echoes of their footsteps reverberated throughout the abandoned halls, accompanied only by their own yells to one another and the faint whispers of the wind. The furniture, artwork, and countless treasures of the mansion stood as silent witnesses to whatever had unfolded within these walls. Other members of the group decided to check the many warehouses and sheds dispersed around the estate, where their servants had hurriedly collected people from. The sight that greeted them fulfilled their hopes to find evidence of malice. But what it revealed would forever scar the minds of those who took witness. It was a scene of unspeakable horror, a grotesque tableau of blood-stained instruments, discarded medical equipment, and the remains of animals, as well as humans, sacrificed to dark experimentation. Like the poor soul who had stumbled his way to town, the victims had an assortment of different animal appendages and skin attached to them. The investigation recoiled in revulsion, their eyes widening in disbelief at the evidence of twisted surgeries and macabre practices that had unfolded within those structures. The weight of the atrocities became almost unbearable. Some turned away, unable to face the full extent of the horrors that had been concealed for so long. After witnessing such atrocities, the realization that the perpetrators had managed to escape fueled a renewed sense of urgency and desperation. Ralph and the crew reasoned that there had to be a secret passage somewhere. The mob began tearing the house to shreds, looking for any sign of a hidden door or cellar entrance. Then, a cry came from one of the men in the study. There, behind a desk, a lever was discovered, and once pulled, a hidden doorway opened up to a stairwell that went beneath the house, a narrow hallway whose width would not allow for more than one man at a time to go forward, lay before them, making whoever went first susceptible to attack. It was Ralph who suggested that he lead the way. It was his daughter that they were there to retrieve, and thus it should be his chance to take. With a knife drawn in front of him, Ralph descended the stairs with a long line of men behind him. He called out for his daughter, but the only response was silence. The spiral stairwell opened up to an enormous chamber that lay beneath the house. The sight that Ralph beheld was worse than anything he could have imagined. There, beneath this ominous mansion, was a kind of demonic chapel. Rows of seats lined in front of a grand altar on which were carved strange occult symbols. In the seats, a scatter of servants sat, all of whom had their throats slit. Blood covered the floor. On top of the altar lay the deceased bodies of both Naomi and Juliana, sprawled out like some form of grotesque offerings. Their hearts had been removed and lay on the floor in front of the altar. Taking in the gruesome visage, Ralph began to wail in despair, and the men who had followed him took in the sight themselves as they entered behind him. It was so revolting that some of the men had to turn and leave, back up the stairwell. But those with stronger stomachs came forward to investigate the macabre scene. Nolan was nowhere to be found. Then, the sound of a baby's cry came from beneath the altar. One of the men closest to it peered beneath the blood-soaked table, where he found a newly born child. Within the little wicker basket, wrapped in a blanket, was a blue-skinned baby girl. He cautiously lifted her and showed her to the others. "We have to kill it," one of the men cried. "It's the spawn of the devil," another yelled out in fear. But Ralph, still freshly stricken by the grief of his daughter, saw only the last vestiges of his beloved child in that blue face, and immediately grabbed the blanket away from the men. He refused to do such a horrible thing and declared the child innocent. The sheriff, who had only just arrived at the scene, caught wind of what was occurring and quickly came to the aid of Ralph. He told the men to get hold of their senses and that any man who lay a hand on the child would be severely punished by the law. Ralph, basket in hand, quickly exited the disgusting chamber and took his grandchild to safety. As he glanced down at the newborn, he was astonished by its resemblance to both his daughter and his former wife. He prayed to the heavens that she was not shrouded by whatever cursed activities had occurred only moments before. Nolan's body was never found, and the mob of crazed men slowly gave up in their search for him. While the victims' bodies would provide the physical evidence needed to validate this unlawful raid, the discovery only slightly relieved their lingering fears. Unanswered questions gnawed at their minds, leaving a haunting sense that the true depth of what had happened out there would never be revealed. When the news of what the mob had found arrived back in Winchester, the townsfolk recoiled in horror, their reactions an array of emotions, from anger to pity and revulsion. The child's physical appearance, with its surreal blue skin and obvious family resemblance to its incestuous parents, served as chilling proof of their suspicions. Whispers of anger and vengeance filled the air, some demanding the child be extinguished to eradicate the taint of evil. But the compassionate sheriff, touched by the innocent vulnerability of the baby, stood resolute in his legal defense. Amid the lingering discontent and murmurs of dissent, a lawful decision was reached by the courts to establish a trust for the infant, who was clearly the only living heir to the estate. The funds were secured by the hefty sums of money found inside the mansion, ensuring her well-being and protection. An experienced nurse was appointed to help Ralph care for the child, providing her with a nurturing and loving environment to bring an end to the evil of her family's legacy. Though met with discontent from some corners of the town, the laws that safeguarded the rights of the innocent prevailed. The child, named Cassandra Windward by Ralph, was the sole heir remaining and would be granted ownership of the estate on her 18th birthday. The decision, while not without controversy, served as a testament to the importance of justice, even in the face of darkness. Ralph did his best to help raise Cassandra, but he was never quite the same after the event. His health diminished in the following years. The appointed nurse attended Cassandra's upbringing, shielded from the public due to her strange appearance and the horrible stories surrounding her past. She was a solitary girl. When she reached her 18th birthday, she returned to that house. It was not without much grumbling from the residents of Winchester, but there was nothing they could do to stop it. And there she lives to this day. And that, my boy, is the story of the blue woman you saw in town today, Cassandra Windward, Arlo said, patting his boy's head. The boy was now lying nuzzled in his bed, the long journey home well since over. The man had carried on with the story all the way home from town and then all the way up to the boy's bedroom. He had continued it as he had tucked the boy into bed. The boy looked terrified and appalled at the dazzling tale he had just been told. His innocent brain had never envisioned such horrors. But that indeed was the point. Arlo smiled and rustled the boy's hair. "So," Arlo asked his young son, "are you ever going to approach the blue woman again?" The boy looked like he was about to be sick and shook his head vigorously. "Good boy," Arlo said, and left the room, leaving his poor boy to be terrified all night. And indeed, that was the point, for the citizens of Winchester never, ever wanted those horrors to happen again.